This Fireside Chat, my name is Chris Merck, and I work here as the interim executive director. I expect to be replaced by a permanent executive director sometime in June. And if you're on our mailing list, I hope we'll be able to send out an announcement at the end of next week, if all goes well. I want to mention our upcoming events in this series on the 28th of April, also at 4 o'clock. The former head nurse of the Shanghai Hospital, Maud Pettis, is going to be talking about her medical career in China. Maud is now 101 years old.
Oh my word.
And is still quite lucid and remembers her years in China very vividly. So we like to have her come back, and because we know we may not have her very much longer. So that's on the 28th of April. And then on May 5th, Jason Hirol, who's the director of the ACES Educational Center for the Arts across about a block that way, will be here talking about what they do. And among the things they do is a very active attempt to develop ties with arts educational institutes in China, one way or another. He's been to China a number of times, and they're doing some really interesting work at ECA with high school age students drawn from this region. And then on the 12th of May, we're co-sponsoring an event with the drama school, which will be a talk by Professor Changyong Huang, who is vice president of the Shanghai Theater Academy, and he's going to be talking about theater in Shanghai. And that will not be here, I think.
School of Drama.
At the School of Drama. Do we know where?
222 York Street.
Okay, but we don't know where in the school. You just wander in there.
We will send details are back.
Anyway, we'll be sending out announcements with an actual venue, but it won't. That one will not be here. That'll be at the drama school. So if you're interested in Shanghai theater and what's going on, come see Professor Huang. We've got today. One of the people I've actually wanted to meet for a while. I used to live in Beijing, and if you're a businessman in Beijing, you very rapidly get to know the people who work as journalists for major institutions, and also those who are freelancing, who are sometimes some of the most interesting and risk-taking journalists in China. One of them whose work I've followed over the years is Nick Frisch, but I don't think we've ever actually met until today. He had been looking at the developing opera around Sun Yat-sen for some time, and then when it began to look like there might be a problem with it, pitched the story to the New York Times, who engaged him as a freelancer to write it. So that's the most recent source in which we've seen his byline. He's now here at Yale working on a PhD on the history of Chinese journalism, a topic yet to be sharply defined, but maybe in the Republican period or later. We'll see how that works out. And he's also I have to look at my cheat sheet to get this right. He is a resident fellow at the law school's Information Society project. He's going to talk today about the opera on Sun Yat-sen and the way of what happened to it, why it was closed down, or not even closed down, not permitted to open at the very last moment. And I think it's one of the most interesting stories that you can, one of the most interesting examples of the censorship story in China. The fascinating thing about censorship in China is that you don't really know how it works. A lot of it is self-censorship that you do based on reading the tea leaves. And the Chinese government is famously unresponsive and unaccountable in explaining why things happen. So we're fortunate today in that Nick is going to explain to us how this works.
Thank you so much, Christian, and thank you so much, all of you, for being here today, for braving this seductively sunny afternoon to join me indoors. It's a real pleasure and a privilege to have the opportunity to talk to you about something that comes up a lot in our everyday lives if we deal with China in any capacity, but especially in arts or culture or media, but is not often discussed or articulated for many of the reasons that Christian just explained. A lot of stuff is self-imposed. It's about reading the tea leaves and trying to figure out what's going on. And so, in this case, imagine, that you are in the performing arts, say a playwright or a composer or a director, set designer, and you're working on this world premiere of a brand new work. And you're working with all of these other artists, the orchestra musicians, the conductor, lighting design. These kinds of things are planned months, years in advance, down to the last detail. And it's going to premiere in 3 weeks at a top national venue. And then after all of these years of planning and thousands of edits to the score and the libretto, and the rehearsals are already starting, dozens of people fly in from around the world, hundreds of people on site are getting this gigantic venture underway. Suddenly, you find out that there's not going to be an opening night. The tickets are already being sold, the posters are up in the lobby, the buzz is building, but with no reason given, you are told that you're not going to get an opening night. What happens then? And the answer depends on where you are. If something like that were to happen in Lincoln Center, or in Rome or Milan, it would be a career-destroying scandal for the people who pulled the plug and were not able to give a good reason why. These things are set up in contracts years and years in advance. It would probably be, would probably go to arbitration or maybe end up in court. There would be no way to sweep something under the rug with such a large number of people involved and the years of planning that went into it. But the story I'm telling today happened in China. And of course, in China, it's always a little bit different from how they do things. And as Christian mentioned, censorship is this very loaded term. And I use it reluctantly, and I used it in quotation marks in the title for this talk, because it's easy to bring your own preconceived value judgments, or to say, well, this is a clear-cut case of censorship, or this isn't. Especially Americans, and we're really serious about our free speech. But at the same time, from the Chinese side, it's important to remember that there are people who are actually censors. I mean, that's their title. That's what it might say on their business card. And they actually do review works and deem them to be acceptable or unacceptable, or ask for certain changes. And this is a formal job title in the arts, creative arts bureaucracy in China. They usually do some work, but most of the work is self-censorship. And it's only in rare events where you actually see the censorship mechanism in action, or you get to see the self-censorship mechanism in action, and you get to see the back and forth of trying to anticipate what the authorities don't want or what they want. And only when you get up to a really complex art form, maybe on the simplest end you have a Weibo tweet. It's easy to write, it's easy to delete. And then maybe somewhere in the middle you have a novel, you can write it, maybe you can't publish it, but you can circulate it. One example that got a lot of attention was the movie Django Unchained. Because you can imagine they had sent all of the reels out to all of the theaters in China. And then the day it was supposed to open, it was suddenly canceled due to technical reasons. And when it resurfaced, there was some nudity reduced, and it went out to fewer theaters. So you can kind of have a sense of what the problem was. But these are businessmen, including in the theater system, and it's very rare that you would get to the point where you're actually distributing it or publishing it, and then you pull it. Usually those decisions are made way, way earlier in the process, out of sight. And above movies, I mean, opera is really the aircraft carrier of the performing arts in terms of the cost, the sophistication, and you get it's a live performance, which means that everything has to come together exactly at the right time. Everything is carefully vetted and determined way in advance. And if it doesn't come across right, then it turns into a huge train wreck. And that's what sort of almost happened here. And it's an interesting case because in addition to getting to show you videos of music and dancing and other fun stuff that doesn't normally come up, it's quite rare that a single event of censorship or adjusting something for political content actually generates enough information in the public sphere, like a particle collision, that we can actually try to piece together what happened. And so this is a recreation of some of my reporting where I get to kind of show my work and go into what was happening. The weird thing about the Sun Yat-sen opera is that it was never formally censored. This is an opera that was formally censored in 2010, and it was a Handel production that had a sexually aroused, anatomically correct male donkey and references to capital punishment. And somehow the censors didn't catch that until pretty late in the game, and so it ended with a number of last-minute changes that left the audience perplexed. But the production went ahead. So this is a case where the person who actually has censor in their job title came and altered something. But this is the opera that I'm talking about, and I'll take you into a little bit of the history quickly. It was in commemoration of the centenary of the 1911 Revolution. It was commissioned by Opera Hong Kong, based in Hong Kong, the former British colony, now a special administrative region of China. An all-star cast. The composer was Huang Ruo, who is from China, but he lives in New York. He went to Oberlin and Juilliard. He's very much part of the New York contemporary music scene. The librettist was the playwright Candice Chong. She was educated in the UK and lives in Hong Kong. And then Warren Mock, a man of many talents, was the producer. He's the director of Opera Hong Kong. He commissioned the opera. But he was born in Beijing. He lives in Hong Kong. He does a lot of work in mainland China. And then finally the director, Chen Xinyi, who is very much inside the Beijing system, has done her whole career as a sort of a people's artist, as they used to be called. And so those of us in the press got notified this way. It was an Opera Hong Kong commission, and it had this exciting buzz of an international production that was going to be a trans-Pacific cross-cultural event, including a early test run of Act 1 in New York City with the New York City Opera at NYU. And China Daily was very happy to do it. There's some pictures from the production from CNN. They're just singing it. This was the first time that the New York City Opera choristers had ever sung in Mandarin Chinese. So everything is consistent with a cross-cultural collaboration. No obvious signs of trouble. It's not like someone said, let's do an opera about the Dalai Lama, you know, and then wanted to take that to Beijing. And then this was meant to be the world premiere in Beijing at the National Center for the Performing Arts, this gigantic structure, this enormous opera house. And then it was going to go to Hong Kong. And then finally it was supposed to go to Guangzhou. So you can imagine the amount of resources and attention that were being put into this. This was going to be a very big event. And this is the Guangzhou, the Zaha Hadid designed Guangzhou Opera House where it was supposed to premiere. So this was A-list all the way. Then, sometime around August or September of 2011, these rumors began to circulate that there was trouble with the production. There were rumors that it would be quote-unquote postponed, which is odd because it shouldn't have been a content problem, because the libretto had been submitted and approved months and months in advance, as you would with any other arts organization anywhere in the world. And there were rumors that there was a problem with the music, which sounded odd, but we didn't really know what was happening until September 22nd, when Huang Ruo, the composer, his publicist, put out a statement, talk about burying the lead, and said at the bottom, performances in Beijing were canceled due to political reasons. And then this gets into the sort of bloodstream of the foreign press. Norman Lebrecht, the blogger in London, influential music blogger, picks it up. And this is now becoming a censorship story very suddenly. And then finally, the National Center for the Performing Arts weighs in, saying that due to technical problems, the the show will be postponed indefinitely. And I apologize to you, those of you who do not read Chinese. I'll try to provide a translation. Then it gets into the Hong Kong press. Of course, Hong Kong is an autonomous enclave under one country, two systems, and so they're not subject to media censorship in the same way. And the Hong Kong opposition papers get a hold of it. The Sun Yat-sen opera world premiere is called off. The Hong Kong opera is censored, but this actually means smothered to death. It's a very evocative, which if you know Apple Daily, that's how they would talk. Then the Financial Times gets a hold of it, and sensitive arias, a new opera has displeased the authorities in Beijing. And then a few days before the premiere in Hong Kong, a day or two, my piece ran. And it's opera and some site censorship. And in my reporting, I was able to pin down that the decision was taken by Chen Ping, who is the party secretary and the director of the center. And the reason that was given informally to Opera Hong Kong, the formal reason was technical problems. The informal reason was not politically serious enough, which is something we can unpack as we go forward.
Was that the Hong Kong performance also?
Well, right. So the Beijing performance is canceled, and then the Hong Kong performance becomes the world premiere. But it was a close one. And the reason is that once it seemed to have run into trouble in Beijing, and I wrote this in my article, a lot of people involved in the production became eager to disassociate themselves from a production that had begun to exhibit signs of political fallout unlikely to have stemmed from simple logistical difficulties. And those of you who have ever seen any large production in China know that when they want to get something done, they can get it done, from the Olympics to anything else. And so then George Loomis at the Times wrote his review of the opera after he saw it in Hong Kong, and this has become part of the narrative of it, that it was censored in Beijing. And then later on, we have some coverage from Oliver Cho, the music critic. This is kind of the Time magazine of the Chinese-speaking world. And he blames the black box working style of the Chinese mainland and says that it seems that one revolution had to give way to another. And that's because there's two big revolutions in October in China. October 1st is the revolution of the Communist Party in 1949, establishing the People's Republic, but October 10th is the Republic of China anniversary from 1911. And so this was a big day for two revolutions. We can get into some of the political details, but basically Sun Yat-sen as a figure is still honored by the Communist Party. So they do mark this revolution, but the way that they position it in the official discourse is quite particular, and that's sort of where the opera ran into trouble. So the Hong Kong premiere becomes the world premiere, and because of the press coverage, there's a lot of focus on it. And not only is the Beijing premiere cancelled, but the Guangzhou performance is cancelled as well. Now, if you can do something in Hong Kong, you can do it in Guangzhou. It's a 2-hour drive away. So when Guangzhou bails out, that's the first sign that this opera has become politically radioactive, or at least not desirable to get involved in. And then other things start happening. You'll see the sponsors here. That's Carl Becher, which is supposed to be the sponsor of opening night in Hong Kong. They suddenly withdraw their sponsorship from the opening night. Did they pull the money, or did they just pull their name? I was never able to figure it out. But I did call them up in Switzerland, and they said that we have withdrawn our sponsorship from this production. And the unspoken, what was unspoken was that had they known in advance that it would have run into this, they obviously never would have put their name on it in the first place. Possibly or possibly not related to the flagship store in Beijing, which is their largest store, I believe, in the world, certainly in Asia. And what's so insidious about this kind of case, where we're dealing with just outside evidence, is that it's very unlikely that anyone ever called up Carl Becher and said, I want you to withdraw sponsorship. They probably thought they were reading the situation and withdrawing their association from something politically problematic before anyone told them to do that. We don't know for sure. No one was able to confirm it to me one way or the other. But in an information poor environment like the one we have in mainland China, in Beijing, this is inevitably the kind of thing people wonder about. Boucher also disappears from the ticket website of the Hong Kong ticketing system. So we're left with this black box working style that Oliver talks about in his article. And so I'm going to try to give you some of the background of my best educated guess with a lot of reporting and talking to a lot of people, but you're only able to nail down so much in the end in an environment like this one. So these original operas, these so-called original operas that the National Center for the Performing Arts likes to put together, they're put on at this venue, which is right in the middle of Beijing. It's politically a fairly sensitive place near Tiananmen Square, the Great Hall of the People, and Zhongnanhai, so this is very prominent real estate and politically sensitive real estate in Beijing. And it was actually the pet project of former President Jiang Zemin, who put his own calligraphy on the front of it and signed it. Was supposedly a great fan of classical music and Mozart, and very much enjoyed being able to walk across the street and hear concerts after it opened in 2007. And these are the kind of original operas that the NCPA, or the Egg, as we call it, have been putting together, and these are the kind of people who come to see them. Where are we?
大型原创歌剧《山村女教师》昨晚在国家大剧院首演。中共中央政治局常委李长春与首都观众一起观看演出。他称赞这部歌剧情节生动、真挚感人，艺术地表现了山村女教师丰富的内心情感和高尚的献身精神，具有很强的感染力。
很强的感染力 great, well, anyway, great excitement. So, for those of you who don't know Chinese, that was the main propaganda minister visiting this performance, just dropping across the street. You know, they paid for it. I think that a lot of things that Western cultural institutions don't understand is how closely major arts organizations are integrated with the state in China. It's true in all cases, but it's especially true in the case of the National Center for the Performing Arts. And those of you with eagle eyes may notice that Chen Ping's seat is marked right there behind Li Changchun, the propaganda czar. So he actually wasn't there that day. But if you're in his position, Chen Ping is the president of the center, you know that a Politburo member might drop by at any time. And you try to anticipate what they would or would not want to see or hear. A little bit about Chen Ping's biography. He is sort of a career arts administrator, but he's really a career party man and an apparatchik. I don't say this in a value judgments way, I just say it to highlight that many of the people involved in arts and media in China, especially at the highest, most influential levels, are coming from a very different background than what we would be accustomed to in the nonprofit sector in the United States or Europe. And he has an engineering background, he's very much involved with the party organization of Beijing and urban planning. When he talks to the press about the achievements of the National Center for the Performing Arts, the Egg, he tends to highlight a very quota-driven type of achievement. 2,837 performances, 600 arts troupes visiting, 110,000 artists on the stage in total. It doesn't say much about the quality. Sorry? Oh. And this approach to arts production has led the music critic Tang Ruofu, Rudolph Tang, to call the National Center for the Performing Arts a great leap forward of opera. And that is not a compliment. That means that it's quota-driven, too fast, not well thought through, and the quality of the output is not good. Just like Mao's great leap forward, I think, implicitly. So just to give you a flavor of what some of these original operas that are done in-house inside the NCPA are, I can give you the example, this was the opera that ended up replacing Sun Yat-sen. After it was pulled, they had already sold tickets, they already had these performance dates, so they took this out of storage and they rushed it back into production to fill the space. And if you just listen to the music, you can get a flavor. So I like the pop song as much as the next guy, but when I'm going to see contemporary opera and something that's just been newly composed at a great expense, this is not really the kind of music I'm looking to hear. This is another one, original opera done in-house at the National Center for the Performing Arts. You can listen to the musical style. A little bit of Turandot, maybe. Maybe a little bit of Benjamin Britten. The word I've heard applied backstage to this is bootleg Puccini. I think reasonable people can differ, musical tastes are different, obviously, but this is a very conservative and not very musically adventurous template for opera that the National Center for the Performing Arts tends to do. Did they know what they were getting into when they hired a hotshot of the New York City avant-garde music scene to write their next opera? It seems not. So let's go back to the subject matter of the opera. Dr. Sun Yat-sen, this colossal figure in modern Chinese history, very complicated biography. It's revered in nationalist Taiwan, in communist China, all over the place, but people tend to emphasize different aspects of his biography. So this is really the official Sun Yat-sen that people like to put the stress on. He was a revolutionary, he was a medical doctor. He overthrew the Qing dynasty in 1911, or at least he got there shortly after it happened and took the credit. He was president of the Republic of China. And on the bottom there are things that we emphasize a little bit less, but if you want a good picture of what the official image of Sun Yat-sen looks like, you can take a look at this movie trailer that came out around the same time that this opera was supposed to premiere. This was produced by Jackie Chan. Jackie Chan playing the loyal aide-de-camp of Sun Yat-sen. And while you're looking at the heroic image of Sun, you can also listen to the music a little bit and get a flavor for it. So this was released with enormous fanfare in the fall of 2011 for the 100th anniversary of the Xinhai Revolution, Sun Yat-sen's revolution. Here's Jackie Chan at the launch event in New York. And you'll actually notice among the sponsors is the same Swiss watch company that was behind Sun Yat-sen, the opera. But they maintained their sponsorship. It doesn't quite come out, but you can see it. They maintained their sponsorship of this film. And so this is the official Sun Yat-sen. This is the one, the heroic, sort of larger-than-life figure. The less official Sun Yat-sen is the one that was really more in the opera. Although there's plenty of revolution in the opera, it's quite a lot about the fact that he was a Christian. He had been educated overseas in Hawaii. A lot of his backers were wealthy Christian tycoons. He spent a lot of time in Japan. He had deep connections in Japan. And he divorced his second wife to marry his third wife, who was 24 years younger and herself the daughter of a Christian tycoon. No one would deny this exactly, but it's really not where they put the emphasis in these official biographies of Sun Yat-sen. In fact, the third wife is herself something of a national hero, Song Qingling, and yet the fact that she was Christian, or the fact that she was much, much younger, the fact that her father opposed the marriage and felt that Sun had betrayed his trust in marrying her, all of that is played down. Except in the opera, which was the weird thing, because the libretto was approved in advance. So although it was this great love story that tried to humanize Sun Yat-sen, the content of it can't have been that problematic, because if it had been, they would have said something, or they would have canceled it, because the libretto was approved. So this just increases the mystery inside the black box of what was happening. So there's a couple of explanations that might explain what was wrong. I think we can rule out a logistical problem. That was definitely a lie. And that leaves us with basically two possibilities. One is that what was in the libretto was okay when it was approved, but somehow something changed and it became a forbidden topic, which is sort of the moving goalpost problem that happens. And the second is that there was something wrong with the music. Back to the original rumor, there was something wrong with the music. So an example of the moving goalpost problem, this is a video of Hu Jintao, former President Hu Jintao, singing Jasmine Flower. I will spare you the actual audio. And this was on Chinese video sharing websites and TV innocuously until 2011, when suddenly the song Jasmine Flower, amid the Jasmine Revolution in the Middle East, became highly sensitive in China. And this video of Hu Jintao suddenly became sensitive and was taken down. Even though it was China's own president singing one of China's most famous songs, it suddenly became sensitive. And that would be an example of the moving goalposts. You never know what might happen. So it was canceled. It was, I think it might be up back again now. But for a while in 2011, it was not available. And then, so here's a part from the opera, and it's also a chance for you to listen to some of the music that might support this moving goalposts theory. And you can listen to the music as well. So this is when he finds out that he's going to marry his daughter. This is set in Japan. There were the Japanese friends, and Sun Yat-sen. This is obviously a romantic disagreement. This has nothing to do with politics. And yet, about a month before, there was a case with a magazine in the South where Sun Yat-sen was mentioned as a kind of a traitor in a more political context. And this was a magazine that's known for pushing the boundaries, Southern Window. And it wasn't even their own editorial staff that wrote this opinion. It was an interview with a Taiwanese professor who was very matter-of-fact about some of the aspects of Sun Yat-sen's legacy that are not acknowledged by the communist regime, including the fact that he was willing to cede parts of Manchuria and parts of Hainan Island. Territorial integrity is such a serious thing for the Communist Party that they could never admit that one of the revolutionary forebears had considered making territorial concessions to Japan or collaborating with the Japanese, and yet here it was appearing in this magazine, stirring up a kerfuffle and causing the editors to be fired. In Chinese, this says, "A cold wind from the north." And the editor of this magazine, who, remember, did not express the opinion themselves, merely reprinted what someone else had said that due to political errors, I have decided to take responsibility for the negative influence that this has had on the magazine and decommission myself from the editorship to take time to reflect. 反省. This really had chilling effects, and it was on the internet briefly before being shut down, deleted by the Propaganda Bureau. So you can imagine if you are Chen Ping and you think you have this romantic aria in Act 2 where Sun Yat-sen is in Japan and someone sings about him being a traitor. Is it related to all of this stuff with the Japanese concessions to Japanese on territory? Not directly. Do you want the propaganda minister dropping in on a sensitive revolutionary anniversary and seeing these words in his face in his theater after he's spent the past month firefighting and trying to cordon off this scandal about Sun Yat-sen's legacy? Probably not. We don't know. This is one of the things where we're forced to look at the circumstantial evidence to come up with some theories. The second question is about the music. Was it in fact the music that was the problem? I think it's fair to say on the merits, not directly. Beijing has modern music all the time. There's an annual modern music festival in Beijing that gets some of the most atonal and crazy sounding music you may or may not like, depending on your own taste. So Beijing has these kinds of concerts all the time. The music itself can't have been the problem, per se. So I think it wasn't really a music problem so much as it was a music plus words problem, which gets us back to the libretto, or to be more accurate, a music plus words plus politics plus timing problem. So to unpack this, you need to think a little bit about what a cultural bureaucrat in Chen Ping and his deputy's background, where they're coming from. When you approve a libretto that far in advance, you see the words on the page, you see, oh, there's a love duet, there's an aria, but you also see a lot of stuff about revolution, stuff with a strong political resonance. And when you see some of those sections and you see those words printed on the page, this is probably the kind of music you're hearing in your mind if you are raised and educated in the People's Republic arts bureaucracy. My goodness. So, major key, happy, tonal, victorious, brass section. There's a Peking opera version of this that I will spare you, but the basic musical profile is the same, very unambiguous, very triumphant sounding music, and again associated with these words revolution on the page, these politically resonant words. You might think this is mostly a historic phenomenon that doesn't apply to China today. I'll give you one more example from this 1964 propaganda play. So surely this is an idiom that belongs to the past. Surely even official things wouldn't adopt such a strong tone or style today. And the answer is yes and no. In some ways it's an idiom, official political theater that's been updated, such as this celebrating the space launch. This is for the special musical spectacular put together for the 60th anniversary of the Communist Party. And this is a section celebrating the launch of China's manned space mission.
2008年9月25日，神舟7号载人飞船发射升空，准确进入预定轨道。当中国宇航员打开舱门，所有中华儿女欣喜若狂，
All of the children of China were in ecstasies of joy. The five-star flag.
浩瀚太空，首次踏响中国人漫步的足音。
So some things are different, but some things are the same. It's the little children pointing up. And if you want a picture of what people in the arts bureaucracy might have been expecting for a depiction of the 1911 revolution, we have an answer from this very same 2009 play that had sort of the whole arc of Chinese history, heavily focused on the Communist Party in it. This is a 1911 Revolution Lullaby. At least it should be. So we have the oppressed proletariat of China with the long hair symbolizing their submission to the Manchu dynasty before 1911. Minor key. And then symbolically removing the cue, switch to major key. And then just to really drive home the point that their hair is loose now, they're going to do this a few times. Now the lullaby starts. Sun Yat-sen, fire the cannons. The Revolutionary Party storms the citadel. The young emperor abdicates, and the Qing dynasty is eradicated. If that's how you want to sing your kids to sleep. So, I think that's where I come down, and we can compare some of the music we've heard, some of the musical styles and idioms, with this pretty political scene from Act 1 about the Treaty of Shimonoseki. And it's a little rough around the edges, but I urge you to remember the circumstances under which they had to pull this performance together. So I think you get the idea. It's a very, very different musical style and idiom. Even when discussing sensitive political issues. And then this is probably one section of the opera that had the most, sort of some of the strongest political and revolutionary language in Act 3. And you can again listen and draw your own conclusions. Revolution to the last breath. So, oh, and those of you who are, let's skip this slide, it's a little technical. But this just really drives home the point that we don't even know if it's in B major or minor. There's not much of a cadential point at all. So, to conclude both my talk and the piece I had written, it seemed like Oliver Cho was right, that there was a clash of aesthetic styles and expectations at a very politically sensitive anniversary that wasn't noticed until it was too late. It just so happened that at the exact moment the National Center for the Performing Arts was censoring this opera, they were also signing a historic deal with the Philadelphia Orchestra, which was bankrupt at the time, which was in bankruptcy, and giving it a chance to go to China and give master classes and travel all over and perform internationally, which, needless to say, is beyond the means of most nonprofits that have filed for Chapter 11. And it seemed like a counterpoint worth including in the piece. And I put it right at the end of my article. I talked to the Philadelphia Orchestra's press guy. He said, we need to rethink the business model for how great music is made. I realize that things don't work exactly the same way in China, but we're confident that this relationship is based on trust. And I asked him, was the orchestra at all concerned about creative control? And he replied, I hope not. It's a little bit of a leap of faith. Well, I would say so, yes, it is. Especially given what was going on at that exact moment. And so, to wrap up, it was an interesting story to cover because as an American, I've worked in the arts myself, and I'm obviously a great admirer and a lifelong student of Chinese culture. I have great respect, and yet, although things do work a little differently in China, to me it's absolutely crazy that you would have everything signed years in advance and planned years in advance and then get it pulled for a random reason that you will never even know for sure. It's a bad way to do business, it's a bad way to treat artists, and you won't find someone, you know, a more vocal champion of US-China cultural exchanges than me, but I do feel that a lot of American cultural institutions are not really doing their due diligence and are not taking enough time to get to know their counterparties and figuring out what their exposure might be in terms of reputation or money or logistics. There are many upsides, like the Philadelphia Orchestra's wonderful tour, but there are some risks as well. And the scary thing is that we never really know the full story. It's only rarely when you have something as complicated as an opera that gets this close to being performed and the wheels come off, and you have a performance in Hong Kong where you can kind of do a comparison, that you can get some sense of how capricious the art system can be and the kind of risks that you run. And so that's why it's been such a pleasure to talk to all of you today, because I know that there's many people in this room who are at the forefront of some of the most exciting cultural exchanges between the US and China. and will be in the future. And so with that, I'd like to open it up to your questions and comments.
Questions? Yes, Professor Davis?
A follow-on, actually. It was performed in Santa Fe last summer.
It was, yes.
Could you say something about that?
Yes, I can. There's an epilogue to this story. Well, there's two epilogues. One epilogue is that the new original opera is 骆驼祥子 by Guo Wenjing, who's a very well-regarded composer, but he really defanged his musical style before that opera went on. But as for Sun Yat-sen, this opera that was originally supposed to be done in collaboration with the authorities in Beijing became this really unlikely symbol of free speech and dissident opera. And you can see in the New York Times headline here, the irresistible allure of band in Beijing. And it had this afterlife. It was picked up by Santa Fe. Santa Fe, which is one of the premier opera festivals in this country, announced a change in repertory so that they could include this in their summer program this past summer. And from being an opera that was going to be forged at the heart of the Beijing art establishment, it became this symbol of free speech, a revolutionary who cannot be silenced. This was not me, this was Karina de Fonseca-Volheim, who wrote this glowing review of the Santa Fe premiere. And it was in, a tenor who cannot be silenced, a revolutionary and a tenor who cannot be silenced. So it has this bizarre epilogue that it actually became quite successful in the United States. And even there were some people, I wasn't able to make it to Santa Fe, but there are some people who said, oh, Huang Ruo might be the Ai Weiwei of opera. Okay, well, maybe. let's not get carried away. But it was really funny to me how, due to this sort of bizarre misunderstanding or miscommunication, this opera became a symbol of free artistic expression when it was never really intended that way. And the flip side of it is this 骆驼祥子, which is, I asked someone who was in a position to know, and basically they said that the Sun Yat-sen debacle put everyone on notice about the kind of music that's acceptable in the kind of political setting. 骆驼祥子 is not it's somewhat, but it's not a very political topic. And it wasn't premiering on a sensitive anniversary, but even so, Guo Wenjing, the composer, who is known for being very spiky and edgy, definitely defanged his music. He kind of smoothed it out a bit, Puccini-fied it a bit for this opera. So those are sort of the divergent paths that it took.
And have they ever identified anyone who led to this decision, or the opera company simply says logistical problems and that's all they've ever said?
A few weeks ago, I ran into Warren Mock in New York City, and he did confirm that the music was the major problem.
Okay. And how did he know that?
Warren being the director of Opera Hong Kong, who was, the censorship narrative, but Warren was the director of Opera Hong Kong, was also the tenor who sung Sun Yat-sen in the original production. And this was sort of the divide. Huang Ruo and Candice Chong are not very much in the mainland China art system, and Warren Mock and Chen Qinyi, they kind of know how it works and they know what's expected. And no one told Huang Ruo to turn in your score, 5 years in advance or whatever, or 5 months in advance. And so I talked to Warren, and that seemed to have been the misunderstanding. No one ever, this is something else. No one ever intended this to be a political statement. And actually, you can look at this. Warren was singing in the Chunwan, and this song to celebrate Xi Jinping. So I think there's no secret which side Warren thought his bread was buttered on.
That's Warren?
This is Warren Mock, yeah. This is in February. So Warren is very much works inside the system. I'm not saying this is a value judgment one way or the other, but you can imagine how galling it was to him to find himself in the middle of a burgeoning political scandal when his life's dream was to sing in a propaganda Chinese New Year special celebrating Xi Jinping's sort of new cult of personality. He did not expect himself to end up several years ago in the middle of this sensitive issue.
But did he sing in Hong Kong?
He did sing in Hong Kong, yeah. But
not in Santa Fe.
not in Santa Fe. No, he dropped out of Santa Fe to do more productions in China. So
And who sang his role?
this extremely heroic Lao Wai, who stepped in and performed quite well, apparently, considering he did not know Chinese. He was sort of the surprise star of the Santa Fe performance.
It was all Chinese singers.
It's mostly Chinese singers, yeah.
And the Chinese libretto.
And a Chinese libretto.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just wondered if
So yeah, it was a lot of offstage drama. Other questions?
I have a question. I don't know if you were able to engage with other members of the arts community, in particular the opera and music communities in Beijing, but who may not have been directly affected by the hook coming out and pulling this performance off stage. But can you tell us something about what the reaction was of other people in the community who knew that this had transpired, and how it affected them, or how they expressed their feelings about it?
Absolutely. I gave an earlier version of this talk at the Central Conservatory of Music in Beijing.
I see.
And the reaction was, oh, that wasn't censorship, that was just bad timing. If, their reaction was, these things happen in China, it's a part of being an artist. The higher visibility you are, the more resources you're working with. I mean, resources are all controlled by the state. At this level, there's not much in the way of private or independent. And it's just a part of doing business as an artist at elite, top-tier levels. So they basically said, that wasn't censorship, that was just bad timing and bad luck. Well, the American in me says that's ridiculous. Of course, no, you say what you want when you've agreed that you're able to set it. If your checks have cleared and you have a concert date, and then something mysteriously happens because some honcho in the bureaucracy decides he doesn't like something, that absolutely is censorship. But of course, from the Chinese point of view, it might not always look that way. And that was one of the things that was interesting about this was when the Times ran with it. I don't choose the headlines, but the editor in New York thought they clearly saw a case of censorship, and they really went whole hog on the censorship thing because it fits the narrative that we expect. And it's really difficult to explain all of the political anniversaries and the other sensitive stuff. See, they put censorship in both the first headline and the jump. Slow today. Yeah, that fit, and that's why I put censorship in quotation marks, because in mainland China you do have official censors, and none of them ever touched the opera in this case. And if anything, I think that underscores how difficult it is to get a clear picture of what's going on here, or to even know what your exposure might be if you're going into a major agreement. And that's why some people say that I was, or not I, but because the editors put the Philadelphia thing at the end, and some people say that New York likes to kick Philly when it's down. They were bankrupt at the time, which may have been true, but it's also true that I looked into it, and they were not really thinking a few steps ahead about what this would entail, possibly when they have artistic competitions and other collaborations. It was open-ended, and so the hope was just that people would think a little bit more about how the other side approaches sensitive things, so that when things inevitably do come up, we have a better understanding of what might happen. Yes?
do you think the fact that it was about Sun Yat-sen made it even more controversial about getting it? Did it become more sensitive because of the subject matter?
I think so.
Would it have happened if it was about Marilyn Monroe, as we here?
Almost certainly not. Marilyn Monroe might have, the official censors might have had a few things to say about nudity or drug use, if there had been a Marilyn Monroe opera that had gone on in Beijing. But what really seemed to have happened here was that you have two sensitive revolutions in the month of October. You have a really high-profile premiere, and you have a lot of talk about revolution, and you have this figure who is seen in one orthodox way, as we saw in the Jackie Chan movie. Heroic, larger-than-life figure who is always supported by major chords, or maybe minor chords if the revolution has a setback, but nothing too adventurous beyond that musical idiom.
And not dissonance in any way.
And not too much dissonance, you know, unless it gets resolved to victory.
Right.
So I think that it was hard to foresee. I had been following the opera before this happened, and I was shocked. I did not anticipate any problem. This seemed like a fairly normal cross-cultural collaboration, but someone somewhere, Chen Ping, at least Chen Ping maybe above, decided that this kind of music with this kind of history on this anniversary was not going to fly, and that the cost of pulling it, as embarrassing and problematic as it was lower than the possible cost of upsetting someone higher up.
Would it have been embarrassing, do you think?
Well, it was embarrassing that they pulled it.
Yeah,
Because
more
it was
so than
in the
maybe
New
if
York
they-
Times.
Yeah.
And it's like, you know, you don't want that as news coverage.
Because
and
it really got more publicity by pulling it.
Right,
Than
exactly.
maybe letting it go. And maybe letting it die in a different, slow way.
Yeah, that's almost certainly correct. It was a little bit ironic, but
What was the domestic reaction to pulling it? Because all politics is domestic at the end of the day, and the people who killed this were not really worried about the Times, in my view. I think they
No.
were worried about what might happen to them within Communist Party
Yeah.
politics and on the internet in China and, you know, things like that. So what was the domestic reaction?
that's absolutely correct. There was no domestic reaction. The state media didn't cover it.
Right.
It was certainly noticed in art circles in China because it was a high-profile international collaboration with these overseas Chinese, ethnic Chinese coming back to China to collaborate, and the fact that it ran into this gigantic issue over the content of the art did not escape anyone's notice. But it wasn't covered in the media. I don't know if an internet censorship directive ever went down, but certainly I don't remember seeing anything on Weibo or any of the other internet platforms. It kind of went out with a whimper, and it was really Hong Kong that saved it, because Hong Kong, they still had the performance, and someone came up with the money somehow. And then the Hong Kong media was really hyping it as kind of a case of the big bad party mandarins in Beijing censoring things. And then the global media in Hong Kong was able to sort of glom onto it, and that's kind of became the springboard. But had it only had a Beijing premiere, it might have disappeared with a whimper completely.
Well, you said that you met with some people in the arts about it, and they said, no, it wasn't censorship, so that was an internal reaction, right?
Well, yeah, there's a feeling among artists who in China, but especially Beijing, is regarded as very conservative.